Hi, and welcome to another Todd Talk where we take teaching theory and turn it into teaching practice. The topic for this week's Todd Talk is going to be guiding students to successful collaboration and group work. Probably one of the most difficult things as a teacher to teach is the skill of collaboration or how to work together. Um, Ideally, the way a group should work is when you put a good group of students together, they can collectively create something better than if they had worked on it by themselves. But the reality, of course, is that sometimes one person does all the work, or that one person is not doing any of the work, and as a result, that the group members are left feeling as things were not fair. But the upside to teaching successful collaboration and group work is that this is a skill that students will use the rest of their lives, no matter what field they go into, whether because they're going to be collaborating with, coworkers, with family, with teammates, with whomever. So if a student knows how to successfully collaborate or work in groups, then that's going to be a great benefit. It's a great 21st century skill for them to have. So, how do you guide students to successful collaboration? One of the first things I do is I try to have students identify their individual strengths and weaknesses. And the idea behind this is that you're creating a self awareness. So, I use different types of strategies. So, I use what's called a compass points activities, and I'll show you what that looks like as we go along, where students in a basic idea identify what direction they are, which identifies their strengths, and that way you know what type of student that you have working in a group. Some other ones that I've seen are a profile of a student, where it gives you 11 different student profiles, and students identify which one they feel that most identifies them. You could take Gardner's 7 intelligences and see where their strength is, whether they're auditory or a visual or a kinesthetic learner, things of that point. And then there's a learning inventory where you ask students how do they best learn, especially when they're working in groups. So the idea behind all of these is that you're just helping kids to identify what their strengths are, and you as the teacher then also are aware of them, and their classmates are as well. So when you put them into groups, you know how to find the strengths that kids have and then have them use those strengths. It is important to know not only what they're good at, but what they're not so good at. And then it's also, in creating this awareness, it also is who they will not work well with. So in other words, if they're a student profile number 2 and it turns out that they don't think that would work well with a student profile number 7, understanding that's really important. I once had a colleague who, I'm definitely a north when you see the compass points, which is a moving forward type of person, and she was an east, who is a processor, and they take their time. And what I thought originally was a personality conflict actually was just a conflict in our styles, which is that I was wanting to move forward and she was wanting to stop and really process things, and I was not being considerate to her needs, and she was not being considerate to mine. So we had to make a compromise and kind of meet in the middle, and that's the way the group work works in a lot of cases. It is important because also the more aware we are of learners, the better we're able to collaborate with others, because we know what we bring to the table and we know what others bring to the table, and then we can make the product that much better because we know what our strengths are. So here is the compass points activity. So basically, you have students identify themselves as either in north, east, south, or west. And the different descriptions are, if you're in north, you're an action person. You want to get things done. If you're in east, you're going to study, analyze, think. It's that processor I was talking about. If you are a south, you're an empathetic person. You want to make sure everyone feels heard. You want to make sure that everyone's on board before moving forward. And if you're a west, you're a details person. You're really organized. You like to schedule things, but you also like things to be organized in order for you to be able to function. Now, some students may identify as Northwest or Southeast or whatever, but when I do this activity, I have them choose just one that they feel like that describes them. And then what I have them do is I tell them to go stand in the north part of the room, or the south part of the room. If you are in north, go stand in the north part, west, so on and so forth. And what this does is it creates groups. It could be groups of, there could be like 2 people in one group and 30 in another, but that's okay. It doesn't matter what the numbers are. While they're in these groups, I ask them to discuss the following. I give them about 10 minutes to do this. I have them describe the strengths that they think that their direction has, I ask them to look at to analyze the weaknesses that someone from their direction might possess. And then I ask them to think about which of the other compass directions do they think they would work best with and why, and which one would be the most challenging. And then kind of like a big picture question I have them consider is, if a group you were working with did not have a particular direction or your direction, how would that group function? Where would it be? How would it be at a disadvantage not having that direction? And so I give them time to talk about this, and then I ask them to report out on what the group came up with. And again, this is just about creating self-awareness. So they come back and the north goes, the east goes, so on and so forth, and they describe, they answer the questions that they were asked. And again, this is creating self-awareness as a class. So then a south person is not hearing, oh, they're a west, they need this, or so on and so forth. And they're learning that different colleagues or different students have different needs as a result. Something to think about when you are putting students into groups is that there's lots of different ways to do it. And there are some, and there's no one right way to do it. However, you don't want to do it the same way all the time. So some things to think about is maybe having teacher choice. So once you get these directions and you figure out, you might want to put a north, south, and an east, west in together as a group and see how they function. If you put on norths together, they're all going to move forward, but they're not going to pay attention to details or be organized, and they're not going to be considerate of one another's feelings. That's one thing to consider, is that when you put kids in groups, you are purposeful about that. It could be from a pre-assessment, it could be from your own observations, it could be lots of reasons. But when you're putting students in a group, it should be thoughtful. It shouldn't just be random necessarily. Although there are times where it can be random, depending upon the activity. Giving the students choice, having them choose their own groups. Now, this can create some anxiety with some, but at the same time, I think that it's what starts to happen is that students start to develop reputations. And so if they're not good at working in groups, no one is going to choose them for their group. And so maybe that will cause a self-awareness on the part of that student to start being more aware, aware of their role when they're in a group. It could be a combination of the two. So oftentimes what I'll do is I'll tell students, you pick a partner, and then I'll take another person that picked a partner and I'm going to put you together. So there's a combination of teacher choice and student choice. The students choose their partner, and then I find another duo and then put those together. Sometimes I'll even ask students to say who would they most want to work with and who would they least want to work with. And that way I get an idea of who to put them with. You always want to, as much as possible, have it strength-based. So you have a good variety. If you have 5 great presenters all in one group, and the activity they're working on involves presentation skills, that you would rather spread that out. So you'd rather have those 5 presenters in 5 different groups so that they have a strong presenter for each group. It could be interest-based as well. When I organically would form groups in my social studies class based upon what students were interested in learning about. So I would give them a list of topics that we were going to be learning about, and I told them to choose one that they would really want to go in depth with and to really research. And so what would happen is I would end up with a group of 1 or a group of 7 or a group of, they were all different sizes of groups, but you had students that were there because they were interested in what they were learning. It could be skill-based. So it could be, do they have, research skills, or do they have study skills, or they have things of that nature, note-taking skills. You might want to divide them up based on those skills. You do want to try to separate potential problems, but at the same time, I had this happen to me once where I had 4 students that notoriously did not work well in groups. And every time they were in a group, their group members all complained about them. And so for the last project of the year, I decided I'm going to put these 4 together. They cause a lot of other groups to crash and burn. I'll just let them crash and burn together. So I put them in a group, the 4 of them, and it was really interesting because what happened was they produced the best work out of anyone in the class. My theory is that the reason why this is because they didn't have anyone to fall back on. They had to step up and be responsible because they didn't have anyone who was going to do that in their group, because they were, it was the 4 of them. So you do want to separate potential problems, but at the same time, you don't want to avoid problems that kids could work out on their own. I mean, that's an important skill to learn as well, is that students are able to learn to work with others who normally they wouldn't get along with. So when they're in the groups, one of the things I always try to have them do is to create group goals, which they are um, what is their goal by the end of this particular activity or project or whatever. So it could be a grade that they want to attain. It could be, that they want to get done on time. It could be the quality of the work that they're focused on. It could be a fairness factor. You may have a lot of people who have a real sense of fairness, and they want to make sure everyone feels as though they've contributed to the project. But it's their goal. You're not going to grade this goal. You're just having the students be aware that this is the goal the group has. And then whenever you sit down and talk with them, you remind them what their goal is and whether they're moving toward that or whether they're moving away from that. And if they're moving away from it, what strategies can they do to get them back on track? The goal, like I said, is what drives the group. So every decision that they make should be taking them towards whatever goal it is that they set. If they're off task, you remind them of their goal. You revisit it constantly when you sit down with them. I always make sure it's written down in a contract form, and I'll show you what that kind of looks like in the next slide. But this way, they're aware of it, and it is written rather than just out there. So a contract would look like this. It helps them keep their eyes on the prize. It makes them part of the process. It establishes those roles in the groups, which we're going to talk about in a later Todd Talk. And it allows the teacher to hold them accountable. So this is what a contract looks like, and one example of what I used. And so I would have my central question or standards I want covered and maybe skills, but then the students would create their own goal and the overall goal for the project, and they would put that there. And then they would sign that, and I would sign it, and the parent would sign it. Here's another example of a project contract where, again, I have my particular learning outcomes that I want them to have, but then what it is that they want to accomplish as a result of that. So it is important that when people are collaborating together, that you as the teacher take on a different role. So instead of the traditional in front of and in charge of teacher, you are giving them some space. And this comes in the form of two different forms, which is this physical space where you're actually giving them time to work in groups. So you're not bogarting the class. You are making sure that you are giving them time to work on what they need to work on. So I had a 10-minute rule, which you all know from this, the Todd Talk, which is that I wasn't going to talk for more than 10 minutes, and then they would get to work. It could be materials and resources. I had a supply closet where kids would go and they get what they need. They didn't need to ask. They just went and got what they needed to get. So it was basic things like paper and rulers and pencils and pens and markers and all that good stuff that they may be using for their projects. And allowing them to create an effective working environment. So I would have students create their own workspace. So and they could decide whether they wanted to work on the ground, at desks, at the table, whatever. But they should find the environment that works best for them. Some students went out into the hallway because it allowed them to spread out a little bit more. And then the other thing to consider is the mental space that you give students. So you should set long-term contracts rather than daily checks. If you're micromanaging kids, they don't feel like they have the freedom in order to get their work done. They feel like they're constantly being checked on. You shouldn't be looking over their shoulder all the time. Allow them to struggle a little bit. So when a group is struggling, a lot of times when kids struggle, we as teachers naturally are inclined to help them with that struggle. So the question is, can you let them struggle? Let them try to solve it themselves. If they're able to solve their problems themselves, if they're problem solvers, that's going to be a very valuable skill down the road. And then, all of this shows that you trust them. And by giving students this trust, they're going to be more willing to take risks. They're going to be more willing to, be responsible because you've shown this trust towards them. So, as always, I have Todd Talks available. So they're at thegiftedguy.com. So if you want to check those out, feel free to do that.